والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread His path until the last day. In the last weeks, we've been looking at verses from Surah Al-Furqan, in which Allah Azza wa Jal identifies the particular group of His righteous servants, the Ibad al-Rahman, may Allah make us from amongst them. And in a handful of instances in the Quran, there are places where Allah Azza wa Jal gives depictions and characteristics similar to this listing. The fundamental notion for us as individuals is to recognize that the intention behind being given these types of characteristics is to now individually determine whether or not I aspire to adopt the characteristics and implement them into the course of my life. It's not meant to be a book that's just recited or listened to, but to act upon. And to think about it in the prism that this now becomes a basis of a philosophy on life for me. That is not going to always identify for me explicit answer of what I should specifically do. So if you open the Quran, you'll find perhaps some verses that are definitive of do's and don'ts and rights and wrongs, but this is not even the primary set of characteristics to verses that you'll find legalistic in their nature. More so, what it would give to you is an ethical framework in which you will decide your decisions, choose your choices upon. So that you break out of a moral relativism that says my nafs, my ego, my lower self will be the determining factor of what is good and bad and right and wrong, and then breed inequity, oppression, and injustice that we see rampant in society. May Allah protect us from it. But I'm going to believe in a God that believes in me more than I believe in myself. A God that loves me more than a mother loves his child. A God that wants best for me, does not gain from me by me doing and abiding by these guidelines. And says this to me so that I can now recognize who it is that I aspire towards becoming. This is all to say that what we discuss, you want to then take back and reflect on in terms of how can I start to embody some of these characteristics for myself. The Ibad al-Rahman, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَالَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, they walk on the earth with dignity, with grace. And then when they meet those who are ignorant, قَالُوا سَلَامًا, they simply say peace. وَالَّذِينَ يَبِتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا, that they spend a portion of their night for their Lord in prostration and standing. That there are those who they say to Allah that protect us, keep us away from the adhab of Jahannam. They seek forgiveness, seek protection from the fire. They are the ones who when they spend not in extravagance nor in miserliness. Where we land today is verses that we were looking at from the last time that are now not direct actions of what is done characteristically, but acts that they prevent themselves from doing, things they stay away from. وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخِرَ, that they are those who they do not call upon anyone other than Allah. وَلَا يَقْتَلُونَ نَفْسًا, that they do not take the life of any individual. الَّتِي حَرَمَ اللَّهُ, the ones that Allah has made sacred. إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ, unless there is a right given, an act of self-defense, for example, or something else. وَلَا يَزْنُونَ, and they do not commit zina. We talked about last week where that these verses become indicative of some of the maqasid of the Sharia, the goals, the objectives of Islamic law. We talked about Islamic law fundamentally as not something as just as an end, but a means. And where you see that there is the preservation of faith, so you do not call upon other than God. There is the preservation of life, the sanctity of life. You do not take life, you preserve life. The preservation of dignity, the preservation of honor, the preservation of lineage. Do not engage in zina. And as those verses continue, the recognition that comes from this now is that consequently, for one to engage in other than these things, to engage in it is characteristic of the Ibadah Rahman, but the implementation of it, to engage in these acts that are deemed to be things that are not good, there's consequences. The verses that come after, they speak about the realities of those who engage in these deeds and they're standing in front of Allah. The consequences that will be yielded in terms of pits of chastisement. May Allah protect us from it. And you want to understand that these are verses that are rooted in a Meccan society. This is a Meccan chapter of the Quran. These verses are now being revealed in real time to people who have no sense of accountability whatsoever. They're in a sphere of existence where they could care less as to how they treat people who are from, by their societal standards, of the wrong race, the wrong class, the wrong lineage, the wrong gender. Practices that are abhorrent, female infanticide, the mistreating of individuals who are categorically made distinct because of who their parents were, or perhaps there was no recognition of who their parents were at all. A society that had no sense of accountability because it didn't believe in anything that was coming after. So I could just do whatever it was that I wanted to. Because why wouldn't I? And so interjected now into this, juxtaposed to characteristics that are considered to be both righteous and unrighteous, and may Allah make us from the Salihin, is an understanding now within that society, but nothing in the Quran is written that does not benefit or create room for benefit for any of its readers. Every single person who picks up that text is able to derive from every verse. And so those Meccans are in a place where they're also being weaned to the idea that, hey, what you do, there's going to be consequence to it. You don't live in a bubble that says it's just this world and that's it. But this world exists proportionally to a world that comes after it. May Allah make us all people of Jummah. And these verses serve a key role of being able to now instill within the reader a recognition of what are the broader beliefs that I have. Do I fundamentally understand the reality, but recognize with deep conviction an idea that there is a day of judgment that will come? May Allah grant us ease on it. That each decision that I decided upon, each action that I acted upon, the choices that I chose, those are being written. Secular society is not just society that is godless in the sense that in your worlds that you go to outside of this space, you can't say inshallah or mashallah or anything like that. But secular society consequently also creates a recognition that there's not anything beyond this material world. How can you honestly see individuals who could believe that one day they will stand in front of Allah? They choose the policies that they choose. They engage in the legislation that they engage in. They wake up every single day and somehow decide that it's okay for them to mistreat, oppress, be unjust to others. May Allah never make us from the oppressors. And a key ingredient that when you wake up every morning, you recognize not with morbid senses, but as a spiritual vehicle, as a spiritual exercise, that there's nothing that gives me a guarantee that I'm coming back to my home tonight. We were leaving from the IC one day to go to a program in New Jersey. There was a group of people that were all going together, and the time for Asr had just come in, and we would easily have reached New Jersey to pray Asr there. And everybody said, let's just rush to get to the train. If we miss it, we're going to have to then wait another 20 minutes for the next one. This young college student said to everybody, how do you know we're going to make it there to pray Asr? Why wouldn't we just do it now while we can? What's the guarantee that we're going to get to that point? It's meant to be a reflective question, not one that's rooted in anxiety. So you push away the distractions and just think about it as a spiritual vehicle. These verses in Surah Al-Furqan are giving us characteristics of the Ibad al-Rahman. May Allah make us from amongst them. But they're also then giving indication of the theologies, the beliefs that those individuals will have that define for them a prism through which they see this world. Everything that came in those initial revelations was about telling those people in Meccan society that there is one God and then there is a day of judgment. من كان يؤمن بالله وباليوم الآخر. من كان يؤمن بالله وباليوم الآخر. Again and again and again. Whosoever believes in God in the last day. Whosoever believes in God in the last day. Whosoever believes in God in the last day. They're in a sphere of existence where it's not now creating trepidation that I'm walking on eggshells, but with a liberty, with a sense of strength and empowerment. I can move forward, not bound by the shackles that a materialistic world imposes upon me. That I don't need to gain validation from the mistreatment of others. I don't have to play games with people and their feelings and their lives. I don't have to understand success to be rooted simply in how many dollars I have accumulated in a bank, regardless of what others had to go through in order for me to have those things. But I'm able to live for something bigger. And Allah, in this Meccan chapter, is telling these people who don't have this as a belief, where they're wavering in it, they're stepping away from it. That's the whole idea, that when a new prophet was sent, it was because people had stepped away from what was fundamental to what was being taught from previous messengers. They're coming to bring people back. And so what's being brought back here is wake up. It's not just this world. There's something much bigger in store. When you start to believe in everything that that world offers to you, you recognize that it's a place where every individual in Jummah has companionship. Nobody's alone. Food and drink is in abundance. There is no presence of anything that is problematic. No anger, no busyness, no worry, no anxiety. You don't have to chase after things that give you complacency in this world, but you move forward with a recognition that what I strive to have and yearn to have, I want to have it forever, not just for moments. And I don't need to compromise on the means that allows for me to attain it. And as the verses continue, they're rooted in hope. You have to see them all together. don't do what people do when they engage religion quite often. Here's a verse, and this is what it means to me. What opponents of our religion do. Look at this part of something that I've translated in this way that says that your way of life is something that's backwards. See it all on a whole. Because as it continues, it says, إِلَّا مَنْ تَابَ, except those who they turn back, they go back to Allah. وَآمَنَ, and they believe. وَعَمِلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, and they do actions that are righteous. فَأُولَٰئِكَ, and for those, يُبَدِّلُ اللَّهُ, Allah will change سَيِّئَاتِهِمْ, their bad deeds, hasanat, into good ones. Then it goes on to say that Allah is Ghafur and Rahim, the one that forgives and is merciful. The entire context of the verses are about Ibad al-Rahman, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Literally, the verse is giving you the prescription that is rooted in how you can go now in a space, and the things that you struggle with, that I struggle with, that are hard for me to reconcile, that came from me. I did that thing. All you gotta do is be able to go back to God. And to understand that defined in the Quran, Allah is saying to you here, that He's looking for every reason to accept from you, to not push you away. Why does it become hard to admit mistakes? Why does it become difficult? Think about the stupid things you have fought with somebody about. Ridiculous. Somebody argues with you and tells you that you did something to them that you definitely did. And your response to it is not to deny or affirm, but to then tell them something about what they did that was totally different. You didn't do the dishes in your apartment, and somebody calls you out on it. Well, you didn't fill up the tank with gas. What does that have to do with the fact that you ain't still do the dishes? The struggle is coming from inside. The Ibad al-Rahman, they know how to acknowledge that they can make mistakes. They are the Ibad of ar-Rahman. They also believe in a God who is the most merciful of those who show mercy. And here comes point one as to why it's difficult to admit that I do something that's wrong. Because in my admission of understanding that I do something that's wrong, I now get to a place where I also believe that that means definitively I'm not entitled to have a relationship with the divine. I'm somehow unworthy of it. Shaitan's tactic is not to get you to commit the misdeed, but it brings you to a place where your thoughts now can become as such that says, I am somehow now outside of the fold of God's Rahman. The verse is literally telling you that if you do these things, anything that you did wrong is going to be transformed into good deeds on your account. The notion, though, that turning back has to be reformulated, because tawbah is not the auntie comes to you, here's the terrible thing you did, grabs her ears and says, tawbah, tawbah, astaghfirullah. Tawbah is a spiritual vehicle. It is a gift. It's not something that you do in a state that is, I'm the worst of the worst, and it's meant to push me down. The way taqwa is about consciousness. It's about awareness and mindfulness rooted in an ethical imperative that, hey, there's a hole in front of me. I don't want to fall into it. Taqwa is what gives me perception of the hole. Tawbah is the mechanism that helps me to get out of the hole once I fell in. It's not meant to push me down further into the hole. And if the act of tawbah is making you feel more low, then somebody probably didn't teach you what tawbah is about, or you're not doing it right for yourself. And it's okay to acknowledge that. The whole idea of turning back is rooted contrary to this idea that somehow me admitting this deems me to be unworthy. The first human ever created turns back to God by acknowledging that he made a mistake. The one who does not admit the mistake is not Adam, peace be upon him, but it's Iblis. May Allah protect us from his whispers. He doubles down and doubles down and doubles down. That's where the arrogance gets rooted. That he can't admit that the way he sees it is flawed. That his vision is cloaked through his arrogance and racism. He does everything possible to be able to go to the extent of proving that he is right. It's ridiculous. Who is he arguing with? God? So you got to get to that first state that understands falling doesn't mean that you are a bad person. Illa man taba, that you turn back to Allah, except those who make tawbah. What becomes hard to make an acknowledgement that I've done something wrong, I've made a mistake. For whatever reason, societally, there's a notion that strength is rooted in being able to not admit mistakes. This is distinct from our spiritual tradition, which illuminates the idea that your strength, your courage, your bravery is built upon the ability to admit it. If you've gone many days and you haven't said sorry to the people who you engage with most often, you're coming to a place where there's anxiety, there's worry. I can't own it. I am in a space where I have fear to say that I'm sorry. That's real. You don't want to categorize it as good or bad, but you want to confront it. What creates the fear? Can we have everyone move up, please? And where is it coming from? Perhaps nobody did this to me growing up. They didn't acknowledge when they wronged me, and that's just what I learned. Perhaps many of my days in my own socialization were rooted in people being harsh and mistreated. They didn't engage me with kindness. I'm sorry if that's the case. I see a lot of people day to day, relationship issues, marital issues, friendship issues. It's a generalization that I typically don't like to do, but a generalization I'm comfortable making is that the seat of a lot of the absence of apologizing comes from this place of arrogance, of kibr. Allah protect us from it. And prevents us from being able to move and grow in both relationships with others as well as individually. Just because I somehow feel like I am both stronger if I don't do it, and my doing it is somehow indicative that I am the lesser one in this situation. Your Prophet ﷺ made istighfar, some hadith say 70 times a day, 100 times a day, many-fold a day. It's rooted in a healthy spiritual diet. A third aspect of why sometimes it's hard for us to acknowledge mistakes is because we simply just don't care. It's not important to me. There's a lot of people right now who you can turn on any television and they are gawking about all kinds of ideas of honesty and trust and truth and all of this kinds of stuff. They don't care. They don't care how many black people are going to get shot in the streets. They have no care whatsoever. They don't care about refugees and where they end up living. They don't care about children living in cages. They don't care about tortures at Guantanamo bays. They don't care about how many societies have been destabilized and broken down again and again and again. They don't care about Afghanistan. They don't care about Kashmir. They don't care about China. They don't care about Palestine. They don't care about any place where there's conflict happening in the world right now, just like they don't care about the south side of Chicago. They don't care about other parts of this country. They don't care who has no clean water in Michigan. They don't care. They will get on television and say all kinds of things and say that this is important and that's important. And why it's important to reflect for you and I, you don't want to be somebody who says something but does something different. Why do you say that which you don't do? So fundamentally, you have to ask yourself, is this something that I actually think is important? Do I value this enough that I'm going to stay away from those things that this religion tells me to stay away from, or try my best? And even when I fall, I embrace the idea that the purpose of falling is not so I stay down. The purpose of somebody else falling isn't so that I kick them while they're down. But if I fall, the purpose of it is so that I know how to get back up. And if somebody else falls, the purpose is that I'm there to extend a hand to help them get back up. Don't be somebody who has difficulty in admitting mistakes, especially in the relationships that you have more power than somebody else. Those are the most critical spaces for you to extend apologies when you are in the wrong. Illa man taba, those who turn back. The hadith is clear, man. You go to Allah 1 arm's length, He comes to you 2 arms length. You go walking, He comes running closer to you than your own jugular vein. You're going back to God, not for God's benefit, but in a space and recognition of where you draw strength from, empowerment from, you gain confidence from. You're able to remove the agitation and you build a deep relationship with the divine in a way that you understand that in the midst of all of these things that look for reasons to tear you down, anything that you can do, Allah is still telling you, all you got to do is acknowledge it, own it. Don't do it anymore. Try your best. You're going to always have a place with God. إِلَّا مَنْ تَابَ وَآمَنَ, and then they believe, وَعَمِلَ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا, and then they do things that are good. There's a lot that goes into this. This verse, like many verses, becomes an indication, for example, that when somebody converts to this religion, this is what they're telling the Meccans in real time. You did all this stuff, but now you do this. You come back, then you refine your iman. You're shifting now. It has specificity to the convert experience in our tradition. That Allah then changes. Sayyatihim, anything you did wrong, into hasanat, good deeds. There was people in the Prophet's life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did horrendous things. It's not just something that we tout when we sit and we have the blessing of seeing somebody take their shahada and to be privileged to be a part of their existence, but thinking about it to you as an individual. These were people who literally were in a space where they sought to kill the messenger of God. They killed their daughters, some of them, buried them alive because they wanted sons. They engaged in war, in conflict, boycotting, abuse, murder, horrendous acts. They're coming to the messenger. I don't want anything I did wrong to be held against me. It's a struggle. It's not meant to be easy. One of the most powerful halakas we did at our center pre-COVID was we had people who were recovering from substance abuse address the community. Alcoholism, struggles with drugs, all kinds of things. And they said the biggest challenge that they had was not just seeking forgiveness from friends and family that they damaged relationships with, but the hardest thing they had in the course of all of their sobriety was to learn how to forgive themselves. And there wasn't an eye in the audience that was dry. Everyone was in tears. Not because they also were recovering alcoholics or things of that nature, but they could all relate to the idea that they had something they carried within them that they didn't know how to forgive themselves for. Allah here is saying, all you got to do is come back. You think about what was outlined in the verse before. وَلَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. Shirk. Just come back. وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ نَفْسًا. That they're murdering people. Just come back. وَلَا يَزْنُونَ. They're committing zina. Just come back. These are people who had real struggle. There's literally people who come to the Prophet. I've done everything bad that you can think a person can do. And that's what the basis of it all is. They still strive to have a relationship with the divine. There's a hadith where a man comes in front of Allah Azza wa Jal, 99 scrolls are unrolled in front of him, all carrying forward things that he did that he should not have done. He's reading his own book. And Allah says to him that, do you deny that you did any of this? He says, no, Ya Allah, I did it. He said, the ones who are writing this down, the angels, do you think that they did something wrong in their writing? He said, no. And then one card is brought up in relation to the scrolls. And these are scrolls that as far as the eye can see, all you can see, 99 of them, just going onwards and onwards. Now, this one scroll that Allah brings forward now for this individual who is acknowledging in that moment, this is what I did. He's got now one card that simply says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. When that is put on one side of the scale and the 99 scrolls are on the other, the side with the one card on it hits the ground. The Prophet says that there is nothing that is heavier than Allah's name. It's about the God you believe in. If you believe in a God that's an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you, then that's the God you believe in. If you believe in a God that is outlined and identified to us in our book by him himself, Azza wa Jal, then the idea of being an ibad of ar-Rahman as opposed to being an abd of the dunya, an abd of something else, is going to resonate. It's going to be aspirational. You engage in that act of tawbah, not in a self-deprecating way, but in a way that you don't now get shackled by something that you did when you slipped up. As a matter of a process, when you do this thing of tawbah, you first acknowledge that you did it. You've hurt somebody, then you have to acknowledge it. That's for you to acknowledge. You make firm commitment that I'm not going to do it again. If you have opportunity to be able to reconcile with strategy and wisdom with the individual, you make it restitute as best as you can. You do that. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And in an audience as diverse as this, you have to think about it. I'm not saying go pick up the phone and call some random person you haven't talked to in a while, or go pick up the phone and get yourself in the face of somebody that you interacting with them is going to trigger them to a place that makes it hard to heal. That's not what I'm saying. But if there's opportunity to make restitute and it makes sense, then you do that. You took something from somebody, you don't just get to make tawbah and keep the car you stole. You give the car back. Make dua to Allah for strength. It's a struggle. It's hard sometimes. It's not easy. The companion comes, Ya Rasulullah, you got to make zina halal for me. He's struggling. It's not easy. That's where you know is the last step. You can always keep going back. You can always keep going back. The explanation of the idea that the misdeeds, sayyi'atihim hasana, that the bad things that they did become hasanat. There's hadith that make it clear that this is for people who are also already in the faith, not just those who convert into it. It all comes just back to, what do you buy into at the end of the day? What is it that's guiding your sense of how you make decisions in this world? There's a lot of people who we see every single day in this world, of all walks of life, Muslim or not, that they clearly could care less about the wrong that they do. The strength of the believer is rooted in their ability to recognize that you are both an agent of real beauty, as well as you have the capacity to do what you should not be doing. And the ability to move forward necessitates taking inventory, taking stock, engaging in what we call muhasabah, so that the process and trajectory is one that does not leave anyone hurting because of the hurt that we have created, but also allows for healing and movement forward. The prophetic counsel is that you follow up a bad deed with a good one. It necessitates acknowledging that you did something wrong. Then you move forward to replace it with whatever you can. So if something's left open-ended, go back to the divine. You have room to be able to write something, then do what it is that you can. If you're carrying inside of you something that's generational, that you interacted with people that came before you who also did not have people of forgiveness in their life. They did not have people of tawbah. They did not apologize to you because someone did not apologize to them, and they validated mistreatment, abuse. Just because you are a parent, it doesn't make it okay to yell at your kids. To validate and justify anything that comes into your consciousness. And if your parents did that to you, you stop the movement of that. You follow up a bad deed with a good one. You allow for it to be something that transcends generations in a different way. You change the trajectory. So here now, the Ibad al-Rahman, the characteristics that we're seeing of them in Surah Al-Furqan, it goes into these verses, talking about the importance of being able to acknowledge that there are things that I do that I should not be doing, but to find still from that strength, fortification in the relationship with the divine. But it all starts with being able to first admit it and taking whatever steps necessary that you can so that who you are can meet the potential best version of yourself without having to be afraid in the way society makes us sometimes believe that we just have to be in this foolish endeavor of perfection. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. إن الحمد لله إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. These verses that we're looking at, they're in the last chapter of Surah Al-Furqan. One of the distinctions between tawbah and istighfar is that istighfar we do just in relation to minor misdeeds that you do. Tawbah is in response to major things that happen that we shouldn't have done. Right? May Allah make us from the tawwabin, those who turn to Him. So read these verses of Surah Al-Furqan and just reflect upon them. And allow for yourself to start engaging God's book in a way that it opens to you and you can take lesson from it and meaning from it. So that Islam is not something that was just passed on to me or that I do it because somebody else told me this is the way that I'm supposed to do it. But you bring your heart, you bring your intellect, you bring your entire presence into it. You start to move forward in a way that when you act upon what the book is saying, it renders that contentment. Last week, we talked about Sharia and I had a conversation with my son Kareem, who's here. It's not just a random boy sitting here. I talked about Kareem's friend Jacob last week, if you remember, for those who were here at Jummah, and they had the gummy bear conversation. Jacob's name is actually Henry. It's not Jacob, so to clarify that, I don't know my son's friend's names. And the gummy bears are actually halal, so if you were worried about that, we figured that out. We're gonna have lunch after the prayer is done, so please do stick around for that. And a very important announcement, a family in our community is going through some deep financial issues. They need about $1,500 to be able to deal with some bills that have come up unexpectedly. And so anything you can give in the Sadaqah box today will go towards that family. So please do give what you can. Prior to COVID, we used to have about 800 people that would come to Jummah, alhamdulillah, and we would ask people to contribute to just help people in need. I like to be very transparent with people, and it's your funds, you should know what's happening with them. And before the COVID pandemic hit, we would ask for individuals to support those who are dealing with homelessness, those who are dealing with food insecurity, those who are experiencing a lot of challenges. And subhanAllah, there was never a Jummah that we had that we didn't raise exactly what those people were in need of at that time. This is the first time in literally years that we've made a request like this. And so I'm just asking you all to ensure that as best as we can, we're able to continue on and be a means through which Allah gives hope to His creation. They need about $1,500. It's an entire family. It's not just one person. And so whatever you can give in the Sadaqah boxes today, please do give it. We'll be giving whatever we collect to help this family meet their needs. And please keep them in your du'as, that Allah grants them healing, alleviates for them their stresses, as well as for all those who find themselves in any difficult state at this time.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.